Hey everybody, this is James Mulvaney. Welcome to Working Lunch. My guest today is going to be Andrea Fox. We're going to be talking all about getting into radio and podcasting and voiceovers and that kind of thing. We're going to be going live in approximately 1 minute from now, so stay where you are and we'll be starting today's session very soon. Welcome to Working Lunch. Today's session is going to be kicking off in about 30 seconds from now. My guest today is going to be Andrea Fox, and we're going to be talking all about getting into radio and podcasting and also voiceover as well. So stay where you are. We're going to be kicking off today's session in about 30 seconds. Hey everybody, this is James Mulvaney. Welcome to today's session. This is Working Lunch, and each week we have a different guest on board. We go live every single Wednesday at 1 p.m. BST. The idea of Working Lunch is really simple. We discuss 3 actionable strategies to help you with growing your business, growing your team, or growing your audience. This is streamed live, so if you have any questions for my guest today, Andrea or myself, please put them in the comments. We are going to be doing a Q&A at the end, and the more questions, the merrier. I really like taking your questions. And of course, if you don't have time to watch today's session, you can always catch this on demand and watch again. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Andrea. Hi, Andrea. How's it going?
Hi, I'm really well. Thanks for chatting to me today. Nice to chat to you, James.
No problem. Welcome to Working Lunch. To start off with, for those folks watching, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and just tell us a bit about what you do.
Yeah, so I am lucky enough to work for 1 TV channel, 2 radio stations. I do lots of voiceovers. I've got 2 podcasts at the moment with a 3rd on the way. So yeah, wow. Yeah, it's a lot, I realise.
Yeah, busy.
But yeah, I started off like in local radio, like lots of people do, about 10 years ago. Studied at uni, did English and media, joined the student radio station, then got a work experience at a local station. And by the time I graduated, I worked there. And I did all sorts there. I did everything from like news reading to presenting, editing. And then eventually I'd been doing so many voiceovers there because you're around and it's a radio station and they need ads made and they've got the facilities that someone put me forward for a job at ITV called Continuity. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's live announcing. And I say live because, yes, I am sitting there in the booth watching the TV shows. I get paid to watch TV.
Yeah.
And yeah, write all the scripts for that. And I'm the coming up next girl, someone referred to recently. But that meant moving to London. And I've been living in Brighton before then, working at a station down there. So then when I moved to London for ITV, I got in at... made all the contacts I've made in the years in radio. I sort of reached out to them and I got to eventually host a national breakfast show for Bauer. I covered the girl who was on Breakfast at Heat Radio. So yeah, now I'm working remotely for a station in Milton Keynes and for Atmosphere Radio as well. And I've got 2 podcasts. I think that's everything.
That's a lot.
That's everything.
I think it goes to show, if you want to go into media, be prepared to engage with different mediums, different platforms. All right, so let's kick today's session off. First of all, let's start with your story. How do you get into radio? I know there's lots of people who are constantly, you just mentioned before that we came on, people are messaging you saying, how do you get into radio? We have the same. We have lots of people who are really keen to break into the industry, but it's notoriously difficult. So what are your kind of top tips to get involved in the first place?
Yeah, just hang around, just be in the right. No, I'm kidding. I think I was quite lucky that I was studying, so I kind of had I'm decided with my extra time to put the effort into getting some work experience. I know that's not necessarily a possibility for everyone. And I remember people saying to me at the start of my career, oh, you're going to have to pick one. Eventually, you're going to have to be a newsreader, or you're going to have to be a presenter, or you're going to have to be a producer, or you're going to have to just quit and do voiceovers. And that's just not true. And I think it's even more nowadays. like modern day, and also in 2020 with everything with COVID, you can have what is called a multi-hyphen career. You know, I don't spend 100% of my time doing 100% continuity or 100% voiceovers or radio. And so many jobs in the media have lots of crossover. And I think even though for people who've been in the industry for quite a while, there's lots of deregulation going on in radio, which means there's even less opportunities. But actually, if you're a local radio DJ, you've probably got an amazing contacts book. So have you thought about marketing? Have you thought about, if you're good at editing, setting up a podcast company or approaching one whose podcasts you enjoy and saying, look, these are my skills. So yeah, I think there's loads of different pathways that you can take. And if you're starting out, there's loads of different resources out there. Even the big, you know, BBC will have a training scheme, Bauer, Global, they all have a route in, even if the old sort of route that I've necessarily, and it sounds weird to call my career old, because I don't feel like I've been working that long, but in my working career, I've had 3 recessions so far. So in my route of like, oh, well, I got some work experience at the local station and then I managed to like level up, I suppose, is not necessarily available if you don't have a local station anymore. But also there's lots of tech that means you don't necessarily need to be in the TSA to work for a station.
Right.
So,
and would you say, you know, if someone's, say, 16 years old or 17 or 18, you know, they've just left school, they're going through college, you know, as you said, lots of local stations have been, and this is kind of one of the points I wanted to sort of talk about. And I guess we can kind of get into this now since you brought it up. You know, there's obviously been this massive shift with a lot of local stations that were previously independent or owned by smaller groups now being swallowed up by the likes of Global and Bauer mainly. And of course, they've, to sort of save costs, etc., they've tried to centralize as much of the content as possible. So that naturally means there's much less jobs in radio, not just in presenting on air talent, but also in other sides of things. You know, the behind the scenes stuff, the technical stuff, even set down to sort of sales and marketing teams, has all been centralized. Yeah. So, you know, if you're kind of in that position, you know, you just finished school, you've just finished college or university, you know, I think, is podcasting perhaps a good way to go? Because ultimately, if you're going to go down the route of applying for jobs in an industry, it's really about portfolio, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I think if maybe you are at college or whatever and you're thinking the opportunities aren't there, my local station's now coming out of London, I would say have a calling card. You know, when I started out, we didn't have so many possibilities and the amount of tech and opportunities to just do it yourself. So can you have your own show on YouTube, your own radio show? Maybe you can do your own playlists on Spotify and start that way. Use Mixcloud, SoundCloud to put out your own shows. And especially if you want to get into journalism or talk radio or whatever it may be, you can have a podcast about music. There's loads out there. So I think if you're passionate about it, doing that is a calling card. If you're worried that, I'm not going to be able to get, you know, weekend breakfast on my local station and, you know, learn, there's loads of things out there that you can use, but just go for it. Just do it yourself. And actually, talking about the whole deregulation stuff in radio, like my old station that I started at became Capital Brighton, which now is under
was that Juice FM, was it?
Was, yeah. And it became Capital Brighton for a while. Then I don't think they even have that station physically there anymore. I think it's just like a sales space. But in the old building where Juice is, they're launching a new station. So I think a lot of these places, you know, you see little internet stations or local stations that are being set up by people who do miss that or used to work in the industry. So then if you've like, well, I've had this podcast and, you know, I'm really excited to see what you do bringing back a local station, you can go to them with some content, with some experience to show that you're keen. I don't think it's not easy, but you have so many more opportunities, I think, to just make content and put it out there and learn through doing that. You know, let yourself make those mistakes. It's fine. Like, done is better than perfect. I think that's what I say about my podcasts anyway.
So actually just getting going, I think there's a lot of apprehension, certainly with clients that we deal with, that, they're thinking about starting a podcast, especially when it comes to maybe people who aren't that familiar with sort of talking down a microphone or presenting to camera. It feels like a foreign concept. That's the thing you can reiterate. It doesn't have to be perfect from the get-go. And also, if you're starting without a kind of existing audience, there's not always going to be a huge number of people listening to the first ever few episodes. So I completely agree. It's practice makes perfect.
Yeah, completely.
How about voiceover then? So obviously, you mentioned that you're taking on voiceover work and also continuity and announcing. I'll get to the continuity in a bit, but voiceover work is a great way to sort of generate additional revenue, particularly if you're a radio presenter. Maybe you're not making a full-time career of it yet, but potentially balancing yourself across the radio market, voiceover, etc. How do you get involved with doing voiceovers and pick up clients?
So I guess it started when I was back at the radio station, but I think if you were interested in getting into that these days, there's so many things that I wasn't aware of back then that are recent or that have been going forever. Voiceovers.co.uk, Voices UK. There's another one that I've written it down because I always get the name wrong. Bogdalgo, Bodalgo, Bodalgo. I say things wrong all the time, even though it's literally my job to get it right. But that is another sort of, once you've got a demo together, you can, and you've got a decent home setup or a studio you can use, you can pitch for jobs through there. I would say there are some great resources if you're really, really starting out in voiceovers, because you're not going to make a lot of friends if you're going to the Fivers of this world and putting out work because someone in the office or your best friend told you you've got a nice voice. I've had lovely people come to me saying, oh, I just voiced over this little internal video that we've done. Like, I'd like to know more about voiceovers. And I always point them to a guy called Paul Stickverder. I hope I've got his name right. He's the Nether Voice online. He wrote a great book, which you could download, which is called Making Money in Your Pajamas. But he's got a lot of his stuff is available for free on his blog. And you really have to be your own marketing. You've got to be your own engineer. You've got to learn about editing. It's not just about having a nice voice. It's about when someone goes, can you go down on that word and up on that word and then do this with that, and just doing it. And that takes practice. So I think having a practice in your own bedroom and getting used to, like, okay, what equipment might I need for this? What on earth is Audacity, for example, to give just one of the free editing sort of software that's available out there, and then start thinking about getting professional demos done and maybe getting voiceover training. Gravy for the brain when it comes to voiceovers. They have loads of great free resources, and they recently held the One Voice conference, which happened in the middle of lockdown and had to happen online. But it was really useful, and they put the content, if you bought a ticket, you got all of the talks from 2018, 2019, and they've got loads of free advice about pitching, like how much you should charge for things, because I think that's one of the things in media in general, whether it's radio or voiceover, that can be really hard to get right, and will be one of the things that either doesn't necessarily make you friends or makes you seem unprofessional. So yeah, there's a lot to know, but I think there's loads of great resources out there, but it's more than just having a good voice or a USB microphone necessarily.
I think you make a good point. Also, another point I try and make is if you haven't got a portfolio of commercial clients, maybe listen to other voiceover artists and just see which style you think suits you. Because again, I think different voices suit different kinds of commercial, different promotions. So, try and record some, if it comes down to it, just write down what they say, try and record it yourself and see if you can duplicate a result, or if you could do it in your own style, just to get a feel for, where you might sit in the kind of landscape.
Completely. I think that's a really good idea. I always say to people, like, I mean, okay, yes, I have agents, but even when you don't have agents, you can go on and look at all of the books and listen to all of those demos. Like you say, write them down, copy them yourself. I have friends who make loads of money doing like computer animated different voices. They can make themselves sound like 100 different people. I can make myself sound like about 3 people, but I make a good living from it. And I think if that's your kind of thing, I've seen so many comedians with getting voice agents off the back of just putting stuff out there on social media accounts. And there's actually you know, if you want to maybe get into the industry, maybe starting a podcast about that. There's a podcast about voiceover industry where they chat to people who, so maybe just listening to that even and learning about different routes in is a good place to start if interested.
Okay, cool. And yeah, again with radio, Radio Today have got a great podcast. David Lloyd has an amazing podcast where he kind of goes back in time and listens to things. So there's plenty of podcasts out there. Yeah, actually listening to podcasts is a great way of learning any kind of skill, I think, and particularly when it comes to audio. You know, it's an audio medium.
Of course,
okay, and so to kind of cover off the continuity announcing. Again, this is something that I always assumed it was pre-recorded. You know, when you watch TV, you just think, well, someone's gone in and read loads of lines, but it's actually live, is it?
So for the national broadcasters, yes, like lots of the digital channels, they are pre-recorded, but BBC, ITV, and Channel 4 between some hours, they're always live. I think Sky as well, but don't quote me on that. I might have to check with my friend who works for Sky. So we'll always be live from about 4 p.m. until 11 o'clock at night. And that's another thing that, again, maybe if you're working in radio, maybe your job is not necessarily, you don't see that it's going to be there, deregulation, stations closing, maybe your next step is not necessarily there anymore. Having a think about what you could do. It's a really small industry, but I think radio, people who've done radio tend to do really well at it. Like my colleagues are either people from radio or actors, because they're used to making scripts sound natural and used to being yourself. Sometimes voice actors struggle with like, oh, well, who am I supposed to be in this? And it's like, well, you just have to sound like yourself, which can sometimes be a bit difficult if you're used to sounding like other people. But yeah,
I think also I've noticed a shift actually, you know, when you watch TV, if you watch TV 10 years ago, or maybe even a bit longer, you know, 15, 20 years ago, there was a certain way that TV announcers had to sound. Nowadays, I think, you know, they're trying to be, you know, more unique, a little bit more quirky. And again, it's not as formalized as it used to be, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, like I get to say what I want within reason. You know, we have read-throughs and things like that. So, some channels are maybe a little bit more prescriptive in certain shows, and obviously there's compliance around some true crime drama and things like that, which again is something that I think a lot of radio people or people who are trained in journalism understand. I get a time and I get things I need to point to and I get information, and then in the read-through I find out whether that's kind of what they want or not. But I think you're right, like Channel 4 especially, that's part of their remit, isn't it, to be a little bit quirky and a little bit out there, and they've always done that with their continuity as well, which I think just completely fits with their brand really well. And ITV2, I'm very jealous of my colleagues on ITV2. They get to say they get to be a lot more cheeky than I get to be, I think, on main channel.
Would you like to go to ITV2 and go for that kind of cheeky read? Or
luckily, I still sound younger than I look, so maybe. But I don't know. I really enjoy doing the big shows on main channel. Like obviously, ITV2's got some amazing shows. You know, I think they tend to have live continuity announcers in for things like Love Island and Celebrity Juice, and you know, there's been lots of like riffing off of people's tweets and things like that, which works for a younger station like ITV2. So that's, who knows. I very much enjoy continuity. So yeah.
Okay, just on that note, if anyone's got any questions for Andrea or myself, please put them in the comments. We've already seen quite a few coming in, which is great. So we're going to be doing a Q&A very shortly. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up, like what's next and where do you think how is the radio industry? I mean, we kind of touched on this already. Where's the radio industry going? And also, what do you think about podcasting? You know, is this going to be the future and voiceover? I mean, obviously, I think becoming a voiceover artist has never been so accessible in a sense. You know, I know you said, you know, don't just kind of think, oh, you can get a USB microphone and plug it in and that's okay. But, you know, I must admit, you know, being able to record yourself sounding professionally is really, really easy now and very accessible and much cheaper than it used to be. You know, you don't have to go and hire a fancy studio to get good quality results. So how is this changing things, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was chatting to one of the studios that I use quite regularly, and we were still managing to do a podcast via Source Connect, and because I was able to set up my own home studio, and they, the guests, I think it was the cricketers, we managed to send them microphones and things like that and talk them through it. That I jokingly said, but Brian Blessed's not going to be doing that. Funnily enough, the engineer was working with Brian Blessed later on that day, because obviously he's fine to just, he's not going to be doing that. He's coming into the studio. He's Brian Blessed. But I think in this day and age, if you can get across the tech stuff, editing, soundproofing, and maybe if you are at a point in your career where you're not necessarily sure what the next step is, I always think like retraining. There's sources out there that you can pay for. There's lots of free stuff out there that you can learn from. One of the recessions that I've been through, I was not stuck at a radio station, but I was like, okay, lots of radio stations are closing. I don't necessarily know what my next step is. So I just went and did something. I went and did a stand-up comedy course, right. And it was really fun. And it really actually helped me in terms of scripting and talking succinctly on the radio. I don't talk succinctly when I'm being interviewed. Sorry, I just ramble on. But I do wonder whether the tech is going to mean, because at the moment I'm working for a radio station where I'm not in the TSA, but Zeta to go means that I can jump on and record a show that sounds as live. We've seen a lot of, BBC presenters with their home booths, towel over the table, recording from home. So everyone's kind of had to learn to do that sort of stuff from home a bit more. So I think that sort of technology is going to open things up, I think, in terms of, you might want to work for a station, but, can't necessarily afford to live in London. Well, is that such a big deal anymore if you're the talent that they really want? And when it comes to voiceovers, I know that the Gravy for the Brain guys talk a lot about AI and things like that, but I had a voiceover recently for a bank, and I was working with a team in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and the script had been written by someone whose English wasn't their first language. And so I was able to go, can I just make a suggestion that grammatically I would probably say that if it was me? And I'm not necessarily sure that's the kind of thing that AI, you're adding value as a human being and making sort of those relationships that I think AI is not necessarily going to be able to replicate anytime soon. So I know that there's loads of like technological advances in that respect, but I'm not necessarily super worried about it at the moment. But it's an interesting sort of, when I look into the future of radio and voiceovers, that's definitely something on the horizon.
Do you think podcasting is going to disrupt the radio industry as well? I mean, I think certainly it's become a lot more mainstream now. Radio still seems to be as popular as ever, which is great.
Even more so probably in lockdown, because that's, I think 38% of most people get their news from radio, and that's that live connection, isn't it?
Yeah, we saw back in February, March time, March, April, when lockdown first sort of kicked off, we saw a huge increase in listener traffic across the board of all of our client stations. And it was like double what we were seeing at peak times before, maybe even triple at some points. It's kind of steadied out a little bit now, but it was quite interesting to see. There was just this sudden burst. And of course, it was to begin with, it was when lockdown was introduced in, say, for example, Italy, because that came in before here in the UK. So everyone was listening to the radio. And I think you touch on a very important point. It's that you get that personal connection that you don't get from an algorithm generated playlist like Spotify or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's what makes radio exciting. And I think it's going to be here to stay. So there's always going to be radio, but I do think podcasts serve a different purpose in that, you can be really super specific and sort of fine tune exactly as a listener, what you're looking for.
Yeah. And I think, so many podcasts have live events or have been doing live streams and things like that, which is essentially replicating radio. And I remember having this argument with someone years ago. They were saying like, oh, podcasting's not radio. And to me, radio is like it's that one-to-one connection. That's what we always say. And for me, podcasting, it's that same medium of you're listening to someone and you feel like they're speaking to you. It's that personal. So yeah. And I think podcasting is such a like big and growing industry, and you see lots of brands getting involved in that. So I think, again, that's another way that maybe people working in radio can look to find jobs that maybe aren't necessarily, when they were kids, they wanted to be the drive time presenter, but maybe they can work in an audio medium within the podcasting world. And I think lots of live radio can but can be made into a podcast. So I think that's the sort of benefit that radio has when it comes to podcasts, because they can be both sometimes as well. And we're so used to not listening to things in a linear way. It's quite interesting to see people come back to it in a time of crisis. If I should say that.
I think you're completely right. All right, Andrea, we've got a bunch of questions now, if that's okay, to go through. Quite a lot, actually. So some great feedback so far. So if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the comments, and they'll be relayed to us. So let's kick things off. Dan Morgan says he's 16 years old and he'd love a career in radio. He's hopefully depending on his GCSE results tomorrow. Fingers crossed, Dan.
Hope you did well in your mocks.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, it's crazy, especially at the moment with the results coming through.
Unfair.
And it's all kind of been turned upside down, hasn't it? But he says that he would like to work his way up the ranks and become a radio presenter, but where to start, basically.
Cool. So that is a really good one, and I'm glad that you've asked, because I think you're right at the start of your career. So you could start off and try everything.
Yep.
And you could find out you hate editing podcasts and you hate doing podcasts, but at least you know that. So I wouldn't worry about like trying something and not necessarily getting there, or maybe contacting people at radio stations and not getting there yet. Like I was saying at the start of the chat, just try and make your own, do an hour, listen to your favorite radio station and do an hour and think, okay, if I was coming out with that song, what would I say? And do your own little radio show. There's a great resource that my boss at Atmosphere Radio set up called Demoji, like demo and emoji together, where you can upload your audio and get feedback from proper bosses who work in radio on your presenter demo. So if you're just starting out, I think that's a really good one to think about. But obviously it requires something from you. You've got to put some effort in and put a radio show together. But if that's what you want to be doing, like, you've probably got content now probably sitting on your laptop, so you could go and have a little look at that. For anyone who's maybe a little bit further on and they've got home setups, there's something called Voiceover Hub, which is how I've got some presenting jobs, and you literally upload your demo, and stations all over the world who maybe need someone to voice track because someone's ill or whatever, or maybe they need a specific thing for a specific chart show in a specific country, they'll go and search for you on there. So that is a really good one to have a little think about as well. But I would also have a think about following the people whose jobs you really look up to. Find them on Twitter and just follow them and just engage with them and talk to them like a human being, and just ask them. There might already be some content out there where they told you how they got to where they are. So that's another good thing to try.
Again, follow them, get in touch with them directly. You certainly wouldn't have been able to do that very easily like 10 years ago, or
you
maybe
have
15
to write
years
a
ago.
letter.
But nowadays, you tweet them directly and just maybe go and say, look, can I shadow you? Can I come and sit in on your show and just learn the ropes? And if you kind of, I think the problem is when you try and contact a radio station, sometimes it can kind of get lost, can't it? Because you'll get through to, you won't always necessarily get through to the person who makes that decision. So try and reach out to some presenters directly. And I think that's really good advice. Look at who you actually aspire to be.
Completely. And just one thing on that as well. Like I often get people contacting me and being like, this is what I do. Help me get a job. And I'm thinking, you've just searched the hashtag of anyone who does voiceovers and presenting on the whole of LinkedIn and sent them the same message. Like, make it personal. Like, if you're following them, what is it that you really enjoy? Why would you love to do their job? Why do they do it so well? And like you say, make sure that you find out the person who's in charge and really making the decisions when you're contacting them, and also be respectful of people's time. Like, there's lots of people who are trying to run a radio station from their living rooms at the moment. So, just be a bit respectful of that as well,
Definitely. Okay. Next up. What is the name of the voiceover podcast that you mentioned?
I think it's called the VO Network Social. It's got a little it's isn't this awful? I can think of what the logo looks like, but Voiceover Network. If you have a little look, Voiceover Network Social. I think Vic Redman is one of the recent ones. Let me just have a little look for it. But that's a really good one to have a look for. And I listened to a really interesting one as well with someone who has been interviewing. He used to work on an impressionist show, and he's just been interviewing people like Rory Bremner and things like that. So if you are interested in more sort of like character sort of voices, then that might be another good one to check out.
Cool. Next question from David Waldridge. In regards to continuity announcing, how does approaching a channel work? Is it the same as radio, e.g. sending in a demo, etc.? If so, who specifically should you be aiming to send a demo to?
Yeah, it's really difficult because it's such a small industry. And I know my bosses used to look in really interesting places. They wouldn't necessarily, there's no sort of like continuity announcer website. It's just a thing that you tend, if you've done it, then you tend to have your demo up on your VO website. So they would find people from the theatre and all sorts. So I would look for continuity managers, maybe contact them on LinkedIn or follow them on social media. And if you are going to think about contacting them, I would definitely have know what stations they're in charge of, channels they're in charge of, and do something specific for that. I do know that a friend of mine, I was happy to pass on his demo, and he wasn't necessarily right for our channel, but now he is doing E4, I think. So, you might not, if at first you don't succeed and all that, try again.
But again, is it maybe about tailoring your demo for the channel that you're targeting? So making sure it's like customizing, because again, like we sort of touched on before, different channels have different styles, different people that they want, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Like the BBC aren't looking for the same voices that ITV2 are looking for. In the same way, Kiss isn't looking for the same thing from a demo that LBC is. So, bear that in mind.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great advice. So the couple more questions. I'm going to so one from Raphael and one from Fan Radio Station. These kind of I'm going to put together. So one is, as a broadcaster, how do you go about competing with bigger stations? The next one is with so many internet radio stations around, what can make the difference with mine? So I guess the question there is, how do you stand out as a broadcaster, and how do you compete with, what is sometimes a crowded marketplace, especially if you're, doing a format which is really common, like adult contemporary or CHR, etc.
Yeah. I guess it's difficult. I know my bosses have always said, whenever you were on, I realize you're on. I don't know what that means. I took it to mean that I don't sound the same as everyone else, because it's lovely having people that you look up to and maybe people that you'd love to emulate, but don't actually try and copy anyone. Be unique, because you only have your background, your experiences, your view on things are yours and yours alone. So I think don't try and copy other people, because they're probably doing it better. And I think one of the things that we've been trying with Atmosphere as well, or just because we believe in the project, is having something that you stand for. Like, we've got this Be Vocal pledge with our internet station. Look, it's a dance music station. Dance music is notoriously bad for crediting the vocalists appropriately. And so we've just said, well, we're going to make sure we tell you exactly who is singing on this song. They may not have been credited back in the day. Kelly Lee, we spoke to recently, she's not been credited on recent songs that you'll know from the charts. So that's another thing, like, stand for something, do things a bit differently. I think that's one way that you can stand out, and something that I just recommend anyway. I
think that's a really interesting point as well, because if you're standing for something, like, for example, like you just mentioned, specifically crediting artists who maybe aren't getting mentioned, or the vocalist on a track, well, then you're going to get the vocalists on your side as well. So you're immediately going to build that fan base who are then going to be talking about your show or your station or your podcast to their followers. So I think that's really crucial. It's about maybe, again, if you're broadcasting something specific, because we have a lot of clients who maybe are in really specific genres, might be like country music or hard rock or whatever. And of course they maybe don't, the artists you might be playing don't have the same traction as kind of the mainstream top 40 artists do. So if you're really engaging with those in a specific way, and giving them credit where it's due, it will really help you kind of, and we've seen clients do this really successfully. We had a client who was in the K-pop space, like Korean pop.
Wow, yeah.
And some of the K-pop stars have got huge fan bases.
BTS Army.
Yeah.
don't mess.
Yeah, and literally, like, they were absolutely killing it because they were really being specific and engaging with those artists and making sure that they were crediting them. So that's, that's
I think
great advice.
I think a niche is great, great to be like adult contemporary, but yeah, pick a niche, and you can see that it works because we've got so many niche TV channels now. We've got so many niche podcasts now. We've got, you see, Bauer country hits.
Yeah,
it's not been around that long if you're talking about country music. So, it's a smaller slice of the pie, but there's an audience out there for that.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned it. So this is something both Bauer, I'm assuming it's probably the same in the States as well, but certainly in the UK, both Bauer and Global have been spinning up these channels. So they launched like Heart Dance last summer. Bauer have got like, I don't know, what is it, 10 different, they've got like Bauer Ibiza and Bauer EDM and all sorts of stuff going on. Is that another sort of strategy, I guess, is being specific about your music and, really tailoring your output to kind of not just a genre, but like almost like a subgenre.
Yeah, and I suppose if you're starting out, that's another good way to think about it. I think that if there's going to be a specific like Pride station for, Global and Bauer, if they're doing that, dance, we've seen quite a lot of that. That's maybe another way you can tailor your demo and say, look, I know you're doing this and I've got loads of experience in that area. That might be another thing that gives you a USP if you're interested in radio presenting and you're contacting radio stations, because also it shows you've been paying attention to, what they're doing.
Yeah, just had someone comment actually saying that they share unsigned singer-songwriters, and the feedback has been fantastic for the artists. So it's really, really key point.
It's really hard to break in if you're unsigned artist, isn't it? It's really hard. Yeah,
absolutely. So, again, that's something you can look at doing. If you run a radio station online, make sure that you've got an unsigned show once a week. And make sure that every single artist you're featuring is tweeting out or posting about your show, because ultimately that's kind of marketing. That's going to get more eyes on your station or more ears tuned into your show ultimately.
Yeah, totally. And I think as much as I'm not, I don't want to spend my life on social media, that's where people are. And I think another thing that when it comes to radio presenting, if you can train yourself up on how to edit video for social media, then maybe that is a route into working in radio, because that is something that all the big groups need,
Yeah. A quick question on equipment. I've been looking to continue and step up my voiceover work for a couple of years now. I have some good demo material, which I've got great feedback from, but I don't have a home studio set up yet. What equipment would you recommend to get started so I can continue practicing without spending too much money?
Yeah, without spending too much money, it is difficult. There's loads of great VO artists out there, quite a lot of them in America actually, who will talk you through setups, and they often do tests with mics. When someone was asking me about setting up a podcast recently, and I said Audio Technica do a very good USB mic. I know voiceovers who, in a pinch, when they're out and about, have been able to use that. I think the main thing you need to think about, rather than microphones, I have a Rode microphone, is if you want to splash loads of money and go and get the absolute best studio microphone, but you're working from home, you're going to struggle, because I think the thing that you need to consider more than any equipment is soundproofing, because that's the thing that's going to make your voiceovers sound professional. Don't be in a box. You need like a rectangular shape. You need to think about, wire, bass, all this kind of stuff. But I definitely think it's worth investing in time to understand the space that you have, the soundproofing that you might need, a very quiet computer, and a decent microphone with some kind of interface. I use Scarlett Focusrite, and that's done me really well for years. So yeah, and maybe if you've got like a friend who is really engineering and techie, or contact a local studio space and ask if you can go in and ask some questions. That would be my recommended. But don't go and buy yourself a Sennheiser and or a Neumann and think it's going to sound amazing.
It's about technique basically, and also the environment you're in, rather than just the actual equipment. There's a great YouTube channel, a guy called Booth Junkie, who does lots and lots of.
I think I've seen his stuff. Yeah,
the guy with the big beard. I can't remember what his name is, but he's called Booth Junkie. But he's fantastic. Mike Delgato, is that what it is? Maybe.
What a great name! He needs a radio show. Someone hire him.
He's got a great voice. He's like really cool. Like, this is Mike Delgado. I'm pretty sure that's his name. Anyway,
I've definitely watched him do a setup, which is just, this is me talking into my wardrobe full of clothes.
Yes, he has done. Yeah, absolutely. Or one of those weird sort of semicircular things.
Yes. Do you need a thing behind your microphone?
Yeah. Which again, we've tested them out. We've found them. They make very little difference. But go and check his videos out. He's got tons of. He literally has got almost like every microphone under the sun reviewed on his channel.
I know, so if you're thinking about free.
Yeah, and again, one of the other things that he mentions is, not every microphone is right for every voice. So again, you will sound different. You will find that you sound better on certain microphones than other microphones. So, if you can borrow one from a friend before buying, or even rent one before making that, if you're going to invest, £500, £1,000 in a really expensive microphone, make sure you test it out before taking the plunge, basically.
That is a great tip. And I'm part of lots of sort of online groups for voiceovers and things like that. And that's definitely, people will go, this is my kind of voice. Do you recommend this microphone? Can I borrow it? Does a studio have one? So that's a really good tip, I think, as well.
Cool. Okay. One last question then. This is from Richard Hurst. How do you find a great agent? This is a good question, which I have no idea on. So hopefully you can answer that.
See, I was really lucky because I got the ITV job through my agent on the sly. And then I got approached by Natural Sounding Voices. So I have 2 agents at the moment. And they're both lovely, and I would never have known about the ITV continuity job, to be fair, because I do think in continuity they do tend to approach the big agencies. So yeah, that audition came through them. But I think, to be honest, they always say like your best contacts are the people you already know. So I wouldn't worry too much about agencies. Definitely send a demo to the big ones. Again, same with any radio station. Know who's on the books. Know that the work that they've done recently. Tell them why you specifically want to be with them. But that's quite tough. And I think I've been quite lucky to get work through my agents, who've been lovely to work with, but also just get work through my own website. Like when I say to people, how did you find me? It's normally through my own website, and I kind of am my own boss that way. But as someone who worked, a friend of mine who is in comedy said to me once, we were talking about agents in regard to that, and they were like, as soon as you don't need an agent anymore, you'll get one, which is a great soundbite, but it's completely useless as advice for getting an agent. But I do think, do the work and put yourself out there, and you never know, like, you might be approached by someone wanting to set up their own agency. But yeah, send demos, and like I say, know who you're talking to, and make sure you get your email in front of the people who are making the decisions.
But what you're saying is there's not necessarily a requirement to have an agent these days from the get-go. I think, you make a really good point. It's so easy to kind of market yourself in terms of if you're offering voiceover services, or you're offering, editing or production, whatever it might be. You can easily build a website. You don't need to understand HTML and stuff these days. Use Squarespace or whatever to build a website. Make it. Maybe get a graphic designer to sort of touch it up and make it look professional, and just make sure that your content,
branding, isn't it? Yeah, it's all about your branding and putting yourself out there. And I've had people come to me and say, "Oh, what's your agent like? Because mine's not really getting me anything." And I'm like, "You're on the books of a huge place. Like, have you actually picked up the phone and said what you want to do? Because they're not mind readers." So that's just another little thing on agents. Just because someone has an agent doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting loads of work.
Just a quick one, do you have an address of Voiceover Hub, please? Google seems to be struggling with it.
It should just be Voiceover Hub. It's got a lovely purple logo, very similar to this one. Try.co.uk.
voiceoverhub.co.uk.
If it's helpful, this stream's going to be up online on YouTube, isn't it, afterwards? So I'll go and add some links for people like Bodalgo, which I've learned how to say finally.
Andrea, thank you very much for your time today. It's been really a pleasure speaking to you, and I think we've talked about some really interesting topics.
Really,
if people want to get in touch with you or find out more about what you do, how can they find out more?
Yeah, so my website is iamandreafox.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter, Andrea_Fox, and I'm on Instagram. Hello, I am Andrea Fox.
Awesome. So, yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you so much. Cheers.